Satan is real, and here's his origin. I know everything about him. Everything there is. I'm kidding, I don't know anything. The history of Satan is pretty complex because it's a very ancient idea. Satan, the character, starts out in the Old Testament. The word ha-satan in Hebrew means the accusing one, the accusing word, so the adversary. And so we might think of a prosecuting attorney. And ha-satan is not a name. The ha is the definite article in Hebrew. It means the accusing one. And in the Old Testament, that word, ha-satan, is used about 9 times. 5 of those times are toward other humans. Other humans can be accusing people. About 4 times it's used of we would call a divine being. And of those 4 times, mainly in Job and Zechariah. And Job is the most well-known classic place to go in Job chapter 1, verses 6 to 12. And there, the ha-satan, the accusing one, is a divine being. Most scholars say he's part of the divine council. And this divine council, his role apparently in Job, he comes up where he is, Job doesn't seem very surprising. He comes up to Yahweh, to God, and says, my job basically is, the implication is, his job is to point out when someone is not being true. And he says, I got a guy, his name is Job, and I bet you Job doesn't really, well, I know, I'm paraphrasing, but I know Job doesn't really have faith in you. He just has faith in you because you keep blessing him. Take away all his blessings, he's not going to believe in you anymore. And so God gives him permission, so all right, go do that. So in Job's text, ha-satan is not an enemy of God at all. He's part of the divine assembly, or this divine council, you might say, in the ancient world. That's how they thought. It's all through the Old Testament, that God is the chief creator God who oversees the divine council of divine beings. And this ha-satan is not evil against God, but he sure is a bad guy from Job's perspective, because from Job's perspective, the ha-satan goes and hurts Job. He takes away everything, kills his family, and God says you can't touch him, meaning you can't kill him. So this evil, he's evil in Job's perspective, but that word isn't used. Ra in Hebrew can be evil, bad, unpleasant. And so this character, as it were, does a lot of things, doesn't kill Job, but then his job is to point out he's done wrong. Well, over time, Jews they continue to write literature after Job. We don't know actually when Job was written. It's very difficult to pinpoint exactly when it was written. But we know by the time of about the 1st, 2nd century BC, so right before Jesus was born, and around the time of Jesus, Jews continue to write documents that develop this idea of what we might call demonology. And there, the chief demon, the chief main guy, is given different names. But what's really important in here, this is where it becomes really important, it seems to me, if you want to understand the historical background of Satan, to understand how the idea developed in this time period. Because in the time period, Jews started developing ideas that might have been influenced by the Persian Empire, the Zoroastrianism, when they were in Babylonian captivity, and then came back. Because after that is when they started really talking more about demons and the angelology. So we have Michael and Gabriel and so forth. But this ha-satan character, who was not his name because it just means the accusing one, this adversary, now he takes on a different role. But this is real important. It's the Jews who develop their theology don't get it from Job. They get it from Genesis 6. And Genesis 6, this is, I think, a very bizarre text. It's after God has created all things and so forth, and then the creation itself is becoming undone. So go read Genesis 6. You'll see a short passage where these sons of God can be used of kings in the ancient world, but often that's the typical way of saying these, we would call deities, or these divine beings. These sons of God have sex with women, and their babies become giants, and they will say that's where giants come from. They're the offspring of these sons of God. Well, there's a short text in Genesis 6, and then there's nothing else talked about them. I think there's one other reference at all, 1 or 2 in the entire Old Testament. But Jews thought that was very intriguing, and they continued to write stories about what happened to these sons of God who had babies with the women. And they started speculating and making up stories about these things. And they said, well, these must have been rebellious angels, and these rebellious angels must have been punished by God and must have been put in a form of heavenly prison. And by the way, one of these documents that became very popular is a book called 1 Enoch. And this is a long work, and there's a few different Enoch. So all that to say is from that story, well, if these sons of God, these divine beings rebel, they must have rebelled and therefore sinned. And then, I mean, they must have been around from the very beginning. And then they started developing more theology. So in 1 Enoch, you have stories about this chief demon, but in 1 Enoch, his name is Azazel. He's the main bad guy. There's another book called Tobit that's in the apocryphal works, or if you're Catholic, it's in your Bible, deuterocanonical books. There he's called Asmodeus. He's the chief demon. And another work is called the Book of Jubilees, a Jewish work. Jubilees talks about the same kind of beings in Genesis 6. There, the chief demon is called Mastema. And then you have other books that come out. There's a book called Life of Adam and Eve. By the time you get to those documents, the Jubilees and Life of Adam and Eve, these books are written around 100 years or so before the time of Jesus, or right around the time of Jesus. In the Life of Adam and Eve, you have a lot more talk about, well, if these creatures fell that early on, it must be from a person who fell from the very beginning, an original person, a being, and that being must be the serpent in Genesis. And then, so that's how it developed, Genesis 6 over time. Then it went all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. And then in Genesis chapter 1, they said, see, he's been there all along, and there must be a divine being who then filled up the serpent. And there's a long story there, but the short story is they don't mean snake on the ground. This is a serpent that is referenced, almost certainly the reference of various beings that were known all through the ancient world, called a seraphim. And a seraphim means something like burning ones, because they're pictorially represented in inscriptions in Babylon and in Israel, all over the place. These were serpentine creatures with wings, and they were guardians of sacred space. And so the ancient Hebrew person probably heard of this being that, of course, tells Eve, you're not going to die, don't worry about that, as a divine warrior, a defender of the Garden of Eden. But of course the Jews would say, well, this divine warrior, the defender of the Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, lied. And so they started about, it must be a liar from the very beginning. Well, that translated to Greek diabolos. By the time we get to around the time of Jesus, there's one final thing of this development of theology. So you have, like I said, 1 Enoch and Jubilees, Life of Adam and Eve, and some other works. Those are the biggies. And then the earliest Christians and late Jews, early Christians, started saying, well, if that's the case, this idea that these other books talked about of a divine being that lied and fell from grace and did bad things and leads an army of demons, they started looking in their Old Testament to say, oh, he must have been there all along. And they go to passages like Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14. And those are the classic places in the Old Testament to go. And they said, oh, it's these talks about this creature who was with God and was cast out. In the Ezekiel passage, he's bright with jewels. Must have been a bright creature and very beautiful. In Isaiah 14, you have this creature, this being called, it translates the son of dawn, which probably references Venus. And the Venus character, he's called, well, that's what, the light of the dawn. But in Latin, it's lux fede. And so you know the word Lucifer, lux fede. So the early Christians who spoke Latin and read their Latin Vulgate, their Latin translation of the Bible, they call that Lucifer. Well, little footnote, in Old Testament scholarship today, I don't know of anybody who thinks Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14 are about Satan. I don't know anybody, no one, I don't know of anybody. But that's still to this day in the church. By the time you get to the 1st and 2nd century of the early church, then you have early church fathers going back and quoting Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14 to support a view of Satan that they didn't get from Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14. They got it from these other books. 1 Enoch and Jubilees and Life of Adam and Eve. And so by the time, though, the early church comes around, it becomes this really developed idea. So by the time you get to Jesus, of course, in the Gospels in the 1st century, Satan is very much a real being. He's called Satan. He's called Beelzebul, which means Lord of the house. It means, that's why he says, unless you plunder the strong man, go in the strong man's house, Beelzebul. A variant reading is in Matthew's Gospels, Beelzebub. That means Lord of the flies, and that's a reference to a pagan god in 2 Kings. He's also called Diabolos, or liar, and then he gets the formal name Satan, or Satan. And there, Satan, of course, still means accusing one or slanderer. And then he's called the Prince of Demons by Jesus. He's called the ruler of this age by Paul. He's called a dragon in the book of Revelation. So he's given various, and there's other names. He's given many names. A devouring lion, Peter calls him that. So he's called different names, and so we have all these names, Beelzebul, depending on which Jewish work you read or Christian work. And by the time of Jesus, of course, they still very much believe in an evil figure, a personification, who has a legion of people, demons beneath them, a different hierarchy, you might say. And this, the background matters, maybe not for all your, but I'll say this last thing. What really helps me as a Christian understand by the time I get to Jesus and the early church is this. While you don't need to know all that necessarily to understand it, it really helps me and Christians understand that by the time the early church developed in the movement of Jesus, we have every reason to assume that the average Jewish thinker in Israel would have been influenced by these Jewish documents that were so popular. And it's very important to understand that when Jesus comes around, he does not assume people are some neutral people who they're good people or even neutral and they just need to accept Jesus. Jesus assumes everyone is sinful. and that demons are real, and that the kingdom of evil is very real, and he has to combat it. Now, he combats it very simply because he has complete authority over, that's for sure. He's never a time Jesus goes, oh, what do I do? And it's very important to understand that for these people who understand that to be a real presence in their life, like most people around the world, except for Western rational people who are past all that hocus pocus, stupid nonsense. In the real world, though, most people on the planet have always believed in demons, and they should, because he and they are real, it and they are very real. Jesus, however, unlike other exorcists of the time period, Greeks and Romans and Babylonians, all ancient cultures have people do things like that. Jesus, however, did not do what they did. See, in the ancient world, exorcists would put very smelly roots up the demon-possessed nose, thinking that demons couldn't stand the smell. They would evoke a higher name of a demon or an angelic being to help cast out the demon. They would do various incantations, magic tricks. They would use special amulets, all kinds of things to have power over the demon. But Jesus does not. In fact, most of the time they had to lay hands on him and special ointments and so forth. Jesus does none of that, except there's one or two references in the synoptics where he touches a person. But typically he just says, go, I've cast out the demon, go, your child's okay. Shows to the demoniac in Mark 5 and says, get out of here. Don't kill us, we'll go into pigs, cool. And so in general, Jesus just has absolute full authority. He never touches, his word casts out everything. So while it's easy for us in our rational mindset maybe to dismiss all this as silly, Jesus very much believed that the earliest, that many of the enemies facing him weren't just humans, but were supernatural in origin. And in another video, I talk about demon possessions, and one of the roles, demon possession is taking place because a person has supernatural knowledge of what's going on. There's no way they could have known those things. They can say things like, I know that your cousin died 30 years ago, your mom died of this cancer, and they never even met the person. What's striking is in the Gospels, the demons do the same thing. And so we miss that if we don't know much about demons and the history of the power of demons and evil. Because when they show up to Jesus, they say, we know who you are, the Son of God. We know who you are, the Holy One of God, which is an odd expression in Mark's Gospel. The only time basically the only time it shows up. There's a reference kind of like that later. So these kind of things, the idea is that demons know things other normal people don't know. And they have a power over people that's destructive that other people don't believe in. And they don't know, and they're just kind of shocked. They'll know something's off with that person. Then there are people who know that person is driven by a demon. Well, it's kind of like that today, it seems to me. There are people, they don't know what's going on. They seem to not know, like in Mark's Gospel early on, he goes to a synagogue and the guy just bursts out and says, what do you want to do with us? Well, and the people are astonished, but there's no indication they knew there's a demon in that guy over there. That's like today, you're like, whatever. And there are people who just deny it. There are people who say it's all hocus pocus and so forth. But Satan is very real. So are demons. And we don't have a reason to be scared of them, but they are very real. So I hope this encourages you to not be like Satan. And now really, I want to give you a short history of who Satan is, at least how he's understood through Jewish literature. There is more on this topic, of course. You can read some great books on that. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you'll subscribe, like the video if you like that, share with your friends, have more conversations about Satan. Hope you like the video. Hope you share this with your friends. And don't forget, just say no to Satan.
And subscribe.
And subscribe. Satan doesn't want you to subscribe. You need to.